There is also right now not too many competitors happening because of the fragmented nature and dispersed nature of this particular retailing business. But there is now, over the last 10 years, there has been a lot more activity, the advent of the large players. There is still very little of foreign competition. Somebody like a Metro from Germany has been only able to operate in one or two cities. There's great resistance to companies like Walmart and other large retailers coming into India. There is still a heavy amount of restrictions from the government on the entry of such players. So there is still a lack of exposure to global best practices in several areas on the one side. There is also, for unorganized retailing, very low entry barriers. Anybody can set up a shop very easily. For organized retailing, there are fairly moderate entry barriers, but the entry barriers seem to be rising given the fact that over the last 10 odd years, many of them have actually started entrenching themselves. There is also a big problem in the back end from at the wholesale level or even before that, leading to huge amount of wastage. For example, in food products, there is as high as 40% or so wastage in several product categories, which leads to inefficiencies right through. There is also an issue of non-level playing field, because there is a big difference in treatment of different categories of retailers from the point of view of regulations and enforcement of regulations. A big problem today, in fact, which is hindering the growth of the retailing business, is the availability of real estate and the cost of the real estate. So it's a problem not just for retail, but anything which involves land and the usage of land in India. A lot of issues with respect to tenancy and landlord related challenges. There's also an issue of zoning, which is residential, which is commercial, which is a mixed residential, and different cities and states have different interpretations. There's also a big problem of different kinds of government regulations happening with respect to availability of land, and there's also a problem of private holdings and ownership of those private holdings. Now, one of the funny things in India is that the government is the largest owner of land, but it still hasn't got its act together in making this land more easily available to people who want to use it in a fairly transparent and equitable manner. The existing regulations in certain areas, like the Urban Land Ceiling Act, are pretty archaic, like many other acts and regulations in India, and there's really no big change happening or expected very soon. Plus there are other challenges like stamp duty, etc. So all in all, real estate is a big challenge, and it's actually hindering the growth of retailing because it enhances substantially the cost of investing and operating retailing outlets. But if you were to look at the growth issues, there are several things which play a huge role in impacting the extent of growth. One big thing is also government policy with respect to organized retailing as opposed to informal retailing. Another big issue is the availability of infrastructure, whether it is road infrastructure, for example, or import related infrastructure, or any other kinds of infrastructure. The third thing which can impact is GDP growth, real inflation, which has been a challenge over the last 2 to 3 years in 2000, from 2009 onwards to 2011 in June. The other big area where retailing plays a role is in employment creation and job creation. It is one of the biggest employers, or it is, after agriculture, the biggest employer, but it can even be a bigger employer of more people. And what, on the other hand, is also, it is impacted by the growth in jobs and the growth in purchasing power in other industries. So that's the other thing. Now, if you look at India, India has a great advantage. It's already ranked 5th globally, and it's second only to China in Asia, and it is the least saturated of all the key global markets. But it's also the least competitive because of the various aspects that we already looked at. So if you look at it, there is a lot of opportunity that is still out there in India, and people are watching this market pretty closely because of the huge growth expected and the fact that it is pretty underserved from a global standards point of view. The number of retail outlets has grown dramatically, as we have seen over the last several years, and this data, as I mentioned earlier, is about 10 years old. So what I would urge you is to go and look at what it is today and compare what you have here with what you see today, and that itself will give you an idea not just in the urban areas but even in rural areas of the kind of dramatic changes that are taking place. If you take in urban areas, it's also important for us to see how many of the outlets are only food oriented or food and other fast moving consumer goods and non-food related. You'll find the biggest, obviously one can expect to happen as a single product category is food, because that's something that people consume every day. But you can see, I'm pretty sure that non-food is increasing over the last few years pretty dramatically. Similarly, with respect to the small, medium, large and very large, this proportion too has witnessed a change and is dramatically changing, and the large and very large and medium will slowly play a bigger role in proportion to the small. So, if you were to look at it in conclusion, retailing is a very important industry both globally and in India, not just from the point of view of employment generation but also in terms of the total value that it adds to the GDP. It is very important from the marketer's point of view because it is the final place where the customer gets to actually see, touch, feel and experience the product. So therefore, it is very important for a marketer to make the proper choices with respect to his retail outlets, the choice of retail channels that he has. It is still very unorganized in India, but it has been dramatically changing over the last few years. There are several factors which are impinging on the growth of the retail industry, but the opportunity is immense. And as we have seen, there has been a dramatic change in the nature and format of this business over the last few years, and it is important for a good marketing professional to keep a track on this vital industry as the days go by.